Welcome to our lecture with Abigail Shrier on Irreversible Damage, the transgender craze seducing our daughters. I'm Adam Hoffman, publisher of the Princeton Tory. On behalf of the Tory, Princeton Open Campus Coalition, and Public Discourse, I thank you all for coming. I'm especially grateful to the Tikvah Fund for their support of this event and dedication to their alumni. And of course, I thank Abigail Shrier and her husband for being here with us. We're honored to have you, Mrs. Shrier. Let me begin my introduction with a word about a certain campus response to Ms. Shrier's lecture this evening. I recognize that many of us, myself included, have been threatened and harassed as a result of our beliefs or merely our willingness to listen to Ms. Shrier's beliefs. At the Tory, we respond by recommitting ourselves to the steadfast and relentless pursuit of the truth. We will not allow our deriders to exercise a veto over our choices, for if they did, we would be paralyzed by inaction. And worse yet, as Václav Havel put it, we would be confirming the system, fulfilling the system, making the system, and becoming the system. The incessant calls for the cancellation of this event, punishment for its organizers, and worse, are alarming not so much because I genuinely fear for physical safety, but because I fear for the spiritual safety of America. If we at the Princeton Tory cannot be left alone to think for ourselves in one small corner of this university, then what of America? I leave you to ponder this question. Until then, let's affirm that aforementioned commitment. Allow me to turn to our featured lecture and share with you why I'm so excited about it. I've recently been attracted to the work of Arthur Koestler, anti-totalitarian author and truth teller in interwar Europe. In 1944, he composed an essay known as We the Screamers. He writes how he was led to question his understanding of truth, of knowledge and truth. He was educated to eschew beliefs that balked the party line, and his sense of morality was warped. If only society could rub their eyes and come awake, he wished. Well, Abigail Shrier picks up where Koestler left off. She guides us to rub our eyes and come awake. She offers us a reason as to why we, the Screamers, are not crazy. On our own campus, like in Koestler's essay, we are led to question the notion of truth itself. And that is precisely why I'm so grateful to have Mrs. Shrier here with us today. Shrier is a needed thinker at Princeton. She has been resolute in speaking up on relevant issues that no others will touch, and she has done so with grace and respect. In her writings, she has come to the defense of women and families. She has argued for values that many of us at the Tory live by and care about. Most of all, Mrs. Shrier has been thoughtful on how to approach political questions with both sensitivity and also an eye towards winning. Like Koestler, as a truth teller, her influence has helped Americans come awake. Mrs. Shrier is joining us today as the author of Irreversible Damage, a writer for the Wall Street Journal, and a graduate of Columbia, Oxford, and the Yale Law School. Before I hand it off to Mrs. Shrier, a quick logistical note. Following the lecture, we will have 20 minutes for Q&A. Please raise your hand and we'll call on you for a question. Lastly, please be sure to keep your mask on for the duration of the event. Again, thank you, Ms. Shrier, for joining us.
So thank you so much to Adam Hoffman, the Princeton Tory, for this very kind invitation, Professor Robert George and the Witherspoon Institute for hosting me, and of course, Tikvah for sponsoring the talk. So the question I get most often, what most interviewers want to know, even when they're pretending to care about more high-minded things, is what's it like to be so hated? I can only assume that many of you rubberneckers want to know the same. What's it like to be on a GLAAD blacklist? What's it like to have top ACLU lawyers come out in favor of banning your book? What's it like to have prestigious institutions disavow you? And what's it like to lose the favor of the fancy people who once claimed you as their own? So perhaps I'll begin by telling you a little bit about myself, because I grew up not so different from many of you. I was the daughter of Maryland state judges. I grew up in a multiracial suburb in Prince George's County, Maryland, and attended a community Jewish day school, which I loved. In high school, I worked as a stringer for the Washington Jewish Week and edited my high school paper, and attended Columbia University, where I received the Kellett Fellowship to Oxford. I earned my JD from Yale Law School and clerked for a Clinton appointee on the DC circuit. At the beginning of my clerkship, I accepted a setup with a guy from Los Angeles. And by the end of that year, I followed my then boyfriend to LA, took a job with a very prestigious LA firm, whose daily tasks truly anesthetized me with boredom. I married my boyfriend. I struggled to hold on to pregnancies, quit law firm life, and had 3 children. I taught them to read and sang them songs very badly, and wrote a series of unpublishable novels. Most people who'd known me before wondered what the hell I was doing. I began writing a few op-eds for our local Jewish paper, one of which was spotted by a Wall Street Journal editor who invited me to submit to the Wall Street Journal. I did, and in the course of the year, I published 13 pieces with the op-eds for the Wall Street Journal. One of the op-eds inspired a reader to contact me and tell me the story of her teenage daughter who was rushing into a sudden gender transition. After trying and failing to find an investigative journalist who wanted to take this up, took it on myself, and my investigations led to the book called Irreversible Damage. All of which is to say, I'm not actually a provocateur. I don't get a rush from making people angry. You don't have to be a troll to find yourself in the center of controversy today. You just have to be 2 things: effective and unwilling to back down. So why am I unwilling to back down? Why wouldn't I prostrate myself before the petulant mobs who insist that my standard journalistic investigation into a medical mystery, specifically why so many teenage girls were suddenly identifying as transgender and rushing to medical transition, what makes me a hater? Why on earth would I have chosen to write this book in the first place, and am I glad that I wrote it? If you're here, you're no doubt familiar with some of the unpleasantness you encounter when you deviate from the approved script. So again, what's it like to be the target of so much hate? The truth, it's freeing. I'll explain. As an undergraduate studying philosophy, I spent an inordinate amount of time wondering whether my will was free. This is the metaphysical question, of course, of whether anyone can be said to have acted freely. And most philosophers seem to agree that our will wasn't at all free. Hard determinists painted a world in which every human action was ultimately explicable by the wave function of elementary particles, ultimately leading neurons to fire, setting off axonal conduction well beyond our control, and none of which we were directed. Even if you weren't a hard determinist, you struggled with the obvious problem that human decisions and the reasons behind them are structured by one's upbringing, experience, or even inborn personality traits, all of which shape our motivations. Compatibilists claim that at most one could hope to live according to one's own motives and preferences, that is, motives and preferences largely determined by things like personality, our brains. The actions of man are never free, 18th century determinist Baron Holbach wrote. They are always the necessary consequence of his temperament, of the received ideas, and of notions either true or false, which he has formed himself of happiness of his opinions, strengthened by example, by education, and by daily experience. I remember reading those lines as an undergraduate, tugged by the worry that Holbach was right. Maybe our motivations were determined by our personalities and upbringings and received ideas. Today, I read them with longing and I think, if only. In 2021, it seems like a luxury to worry that our will is determined and shaped entirely by received ideas and our own personality-driven desires, and that those might not be entirely free. Today, before any of us decides what it is we want, we open our phones and participate in our own manipulation at the hands of those who actively want us to see and vote and think differently than our own wills would have us do. If we were not entirely free before, in other words, we are far less so now. Every dating app pushes us toward the same few attractive mate choices. Spotify presses us to like the same music. Amazon pushes us to purchase specific books and away from others. If you're under the impression that the books Amazon recommends to you are based solely on content neutral algorithms, I can disabuse you of that fiction right now. I once asked one of my sources at Amazon, who was concerned about the way search results were being manipulated, whether he'd ever seen a book deliberately boosted. Yes, he said, Becoming by Michelle Obama. When that book came out, he told me nearly every search result turned up Becoming. And the opposite is also true. There are books that are never recommended on Amazon, but by the Amazon algorithm, irrespective of how well they've sold or how likely a specific shopper is to buy them. Or at least there's one such book. I'll let you guess which one that is. But the larger point is that your will is being toyed with, subverted, and manipulated, and in a fairly insidious manner. None of you will be shocked to hear that Google promotes certain search results in order to lead us to a certain perspective. But did you know that for contested entries, Wikipedia assigns editors, some of whom are ideologically committed activists, many of whom have a very particular view about what view they want you to walk away with. If you form views based on those Wikipedia articles or reports by corrupt fact checkers, if you act based on them, are you exercising free will? Given that you've been spun and prodded along to a predetermined conclusion by hidden persuaders, perhaps you aren't. Perhaps you're left in the same sorry state as the Moor of Venice, toyed with, subverted, manipulated, acting out someone else's plan, pointed in the direction that he wants you to walk. We've spent a lot of time in the past few years debating whether this kind of manipulation is at the root of our political divisions. But I don't think we've paid enough attention to an even more basic question. How has it interfered with our freedom of conscience and freedom of will? When polled, nearly 2 out of 3 Americans, 62%, say they are afraid to express an unpopular opinion. That doesn't sound like a free people in a free country. We are, each day, force-fed falsehoods we are expected to take seriously on pain of forfeiting esteem and professional opportunity. Some men have periods and get pregnant. Hard work and objectivity are the hallmarks of whiteness. Only a child knows her true gender. Trans women don't have an unfair advantage when playing in girls' sports. On that final example of a lie, the one about trans women in girls' sports, I want you to think for a moment about a young woman here at Princeton. She's a magnificent athlete named Ellie Marcor, an All-American swimmer who set an Ivy League record in the 500-meter freestyle event as a freshman. Just before Thanksgiving, Ellie was defeated in the 500-meter, the event she held the record in, by almost 14 seconds, by a 22-year-old biological male at Penn who had played for 3 years, competed for 3 years on the men's team, 3 seasons, as recently as November of 2019. That male athlete now holds multiple US records in women's swimming, erasing the hard work of so many of our best female athletes and making a mockery of the rights women fought for generations. Ellie Marcor swam her heart out for Princeton. When will Princeton fight for her? Where are the student protests to say enough is enough? When a biological male who has enjoyed the full benefits of male puberty, larger cardiovascular system, 40% more upper body muscle mass, more fast twitch muscle fiber, more oxygenated blood, decides that after 3 seasons on the men's team to compete as a woman and smashes the records of the top female swimmers in this country, that is not valor, it's vandalism. Where's the outrage? Imagine for a second what it must be like to be a female swimmer at Princeton, knowing you must pretend that this is fair, that the NCAA competition is anything other than a joke. Imagine being told to bite your tongue as men lecture you that you need to swim faster. Be grateful for your silver medals, ladies, and maybe work harder next time, is the message. Imagine what that level of repression does to warp the soul. Now imagine instead that the women's swimmers had all walked out. Imagine they had stood together and said, we will meet any competitor head on, but we will not grant this travesty the honor of our participation. We did not spend our childhood setting alarm clocks for 4 a.m. every morning, training for hours before and after school to lend our good names to this fixed fight. I know why students keep their heads down. They're hoping for that Goldman or New York Times internship, which they don't want to put in jeopardy. Well, any institution that takes our brightest, most capable young people, Princeton graduates, and tells you you can only work here if you think like we tell you and keep your mouth shut, that isn't really Goldman Sachs, and it isn't really the paper, a paper of record. It's the husk of a once great institution. And it's not worth grasping for. Talk to alums at these institutions. They sound like those living under communist regimes. That's the America that awaits you if you will not speak up. You who are studying at one of the greatest academic institutions in this country, only to be told after graduation that you must think as we tell you and recite from the script. Why were you born? What's the point of being alive? Computers are vastly better at number crunching. They'll soon be better at all kinds of more complex tasks. What they cannot do is stand on principle. What a computer cannot do is refuse to lend credibility to a rigged competition, to refuse to strengthen its coercion, making it that much harder for the next female athlete to speak up. What that computer cannot know is the glorious exertion of the human will when it refuses to truckle under in the face of a lie and instead publicly speaks the truth. I didn't write Irreversible Damage to be provocative. In a freer world, nothing in my book would have even created controversy. I wrote the book because I knew it was truthful, and I believed, recording what I had found, that there was a social contagion leading many teenage girls to irreversible damage was the right thing to do. I also believed if I hadn't written it, thousands more girls would be caught up in an identity movement that was not organic to them, but would nonetheless lead them to profound self-harm. But I didn't write it specifically to stop them. I wrote it simply because it was true. When I testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee back in March, I started by saying that I'm proud to live in an America where gay and transgender Americans live with less stigma and fear than at any point in American history. That is the glory of freedom as well, the chance for adults to live authentic lives and guide their own destinies. And allowing mature adults to make those sorts of choices for themselves is absolutely a requirement of a free society. Yes, you can reject the false dogmatic insistences of gender ideology and still wish to see transgender Americans prosper and flourish and fulfill their dreams in America. I do. I wrote the book because the story of one mom and her teenage daughter compelled me, and so did dozens of other parents who spoke to me, mothers and fathers who sobbed as they described how their daughters had become caught up in a craze that seemed completely inauthentic to their children, but which they were powerless to stop. I wrote the book not because I believed the fancy institutions I attended would celebrate me or even acknowledge me after I'd done so. I wrote it because I knew that the point of all the educational opportunities I had had, the opportunities I received that my equally qualified grandmothers never did. The purpose of all the sacrifices my parents had made for my education and all the time my teachers and mentors had spent with me couldn't be to plod through life on a forced march. The point of all the hours my parents and teachers and mentors had devoted to me was surely not to become the world's best oiled automaton. The point of all that privilege, and yes, I think it was a kind of privilege, was to be able to write and think as others lack the will to do. Spotify employees tried to hold that company hostage because they carried my podcast episode with Joe Rogan. Amazon employees threatened to quit if they continued to carry my book. GoFundMe shut down a grassroots fundraiser by parents who reached into their own pockets to advertise my book. And the ACLU threw its entire century-old mission in the garbage, all because of one book with which it disagreed. Joining these petulant mobs is not a show of strength, and it is not freedom. It's closer to servitude. True, if you dare exercise your will, you may sit for decades on the Supreme Court as the eldest member, the only African-American, perform your duties admirably and with integrity, and perhaps not a single elementary school in America will bear your name. Does anyone doubt this is discredit to his detractors and not to Justice Thomas? I cannot claim to know if we are truly free in the metaphysical sense, but if the universe is anything less than thoroughly determined to the last subatomic particle, then we must also agree that freedom admits of degrees. And if that is true, then we are far less free today, in this decade, that you as undergrads have lost a significant measure of freedom your parents once had. Take it back. Take it back. It's yours to demand. Take back the right to speak your minds thoughtfully, with care, courteously, not with the goal of giving offense. The list of unmentionable truths expands so rapidly without reason other than the attempt to suffocate a free people so they forget the exhilaration of a lungful of air. If you are someone who believes you have pronouns and would like to supply them, by all means, that's your prerogative to do so. Whenever anyone asks me to use their preferred pronouns, I do so, and I can do so without confusing my audience or muddying an argument I'm trying to make. I always do so, and I think it's an important courtesy to extend. But when asked, I will not state my pronouns. And if you don't believe in gender ideology, you shouldn't either. When you state your pronouns, you participate in the catechism of gender ideology, the belief that there are ineffable genders unknowable to all but the subject, that no one can possibly know I'm a woman unless I've supplied these. I do not believe this. I regard this as nonsense. When asked for my pronouns, I say, I'm a woman. Take back your freedom. Reclaim it now. Psychiatrists and pediatricians tell me they're afraid to resist an adolescent's demand that she be given puberty blockers because they're afraid if they point out the risks or the hastiness of this decision, they will lose their licenses. Parents tell me they are afraid to push back on the activist teachers and social workers at their kids' school for fear of being called some flavor of phobe. Whatever freedom is, it isn't that. And all of the wonderful education you have earned here will have been wasted if you find yourself one day observing some malfeasance occurring or lie predominating in your own field, and the best you can do is sit on the phone with me, anonymously lamenting the state of things. You will soon be graduates of Princeton. Show some self-respect and reclaim your freedom. It isn't in those moments when you do just what's expected that your will is tested. It isn't in those moments when you recite the script that you exceed what any computer can achieve. Those moments when you manage to make yourself a faceless member of the pre-approved chorus will slide away as though you were never part of them. You will, each of you, have the chance to matter. You will find yourself at hospitals or in banks or in courtrooms and at newspapers where you will see things happen that you know to be wrong, where you will find that the standard line is actually a lie. You may have found yourself there already. If you're fortunate enough, you may even find yourself one day with children of your own, knowing that you are their best defense in this world. And you'll feel the nub of your will pressing you to do something, say something. And when that happens, don't sit there like a sock puppet. I'm 43, which I realize makes me very old to many of you, but not so long from now, you'll wake up and be 43 yourselves. And when I look back on my life thus far, it occurs to me that the decisions of which I'm most proud, the ones that strike like an unexpected kiss, are not the times when I obeyed the algorithm. They're the times when I defied it and felt for a moment the magic and power of being alive. When I felt, even for an instant, the exquisite joy of not being anyone's subject. When I had the unmistakable sense that I've existed for a purpose, that I stood the chance of leaving the world better than I found it. You don't get any of that through lockstep career achievement, and you certainly don't get that by being the left's star pupil. You feel that for someone when you choose a person to commit yourself to, knowing full well that any marriage may fail. When you bring children into a world where there are no guarantees of their safety or success. When you summon the courage to fashion a life, something that will remain after you are gone. When you speak the truth publicly with care and lucidity. And when you say to the world, you cannot buy me flattery. Purchase my colleagues or classmates at bulk rate if you like. I am not for sale. Thank you.